Okay, so the research methodology I employed while I was there was action and participatory research. Now, as with most methodologies, there's probably multiple ways to look at this. So, if you're, an action research purist or a participatory research theorist or purist, I should say, you may disagree with me, but that's great. I think employing these different research methods have to be adapted to suit your environment, and I was in a very specific environment. So what happened was there was a number of things that I became involved in. First of all, there was, as I mentioned, they were trying to rebuild the economy, and because my background was in finance, I actually took part in a number of workshops that were about how to rebuild the financial system that had collapsed because of the conflict. Now, I participated in those workshops, I facilitated those workshops, and I also recorded what was happening and the connections that I saw emerging between people. And what was really interesting for me here was that there was lots of people who had written about what leads to conflict. You know, like there's lots of study about where a war started, how a conflict started. Even this war that I was sort of seeing the end of, there was lots of discussion about how that started, how any war starts. You know, it might be someone shoots someone, someone invades someone opens up and moves onto a disputed territory. All these things are really sort of clearly discussed. But what's often not discussed is how societies come to peace. How a society that's been involved in a decade-long war, at what point do the people involved in that conflict decide that they no longer want to fight, want to actually be part of a peaceful society? At what point do they make the decision that peace is a better option than war, I suppose? And so with the workshops that were part of rebuilding the financial system, people actually, fighters that were ex-combatants that were recently, only a year or so beforehand, on opposite sides, were all of a sudden in a room working together. And so I started thinking to myself, well, what is it that leads to this? What are they trying to do? And how could that be part of the sort of the peace process? And so I participated and took part in discussions around how people had to work together to rebuild that financial system. And there was something in those discussions, I think, that actually gave me, I suppose, a bit of a insight into where peace comes from, but also they also talked about how they had been supported by different social movements around the world. So all of a sudden, this little island here, dealing with the peace process over here, I found links, international links to other social movements, which I happened to be studying. And so that was the first kind of thing that really kind of made me find, I suppose, got me really excited about where my research was leading. So the second part of my action and participatory research was actually interviewing people regarding human rights issues. I was doing some human rights, I was investigating on behalf of some organisations some human rights abuses that had happened, specifically the way that that sexual violence was used in this part of the world. Now, the thing about Bougainville, it's actually a matrilineal society, which means that titles and land and wealth is actually passed down to the woman's side of a female side of relationships rather than a male side, which is very different to the majority part of many parts of our world. So, the sexual crimes or sexual violence wasn't really something that that had been prominent in this part of the world, and all of a sudden it appeared as a bit of a crime. And so I was interested to also know, so I started interviewing people about what had happened and how it had happened, and why the world had gone down that path, or this society had gone down that path. So it was a really tough time holding some of those interviews and hearing what people were saying about perpetrating violence on each other, it was actually really heartbreaking and traumatic, I think, for everyone involved, including me. And I want to come back to that about decisions made and the issue of sort of dealing with complex emotions in that way. But again, I participated in interviews, I participated in workshops, I took part in that process, and I also used that information to feed into the other work that I was doing as well. So again, I was I was participating, I was part of the action that was happening, and so that was a sort of second element of my sort of action and participatory research.